Hello, friends. Welcome back to The Mind Behind. Thank you for tuning in an hour earlier than expected, but I guess it's the opposite of great things are worth the wait. Great things are worth moving up an hour earlier so that somebody who is one of the hardest working journalists in professional wrestling can get some shut-eye. I'm Spencer Levin. I am joined today by a guy I'm proud to call a good friend and, like I said, one of the premier wrestling journalists out there. Gary Cassidy of Inside the Ropes and so much more is joining me on my right-hand side of the screen. Man, it's good to see you. How are you doing? How are you holding up after a busy-ass WrestleMania week?
If I was tired, I'm not tired anymore from both intros. I mean, man, just sitting back and watching the intro to the show play out, it's like, that is some professional stuff. I need to up my game. But then you've just hit me with all the energy on the planet. So yeah, great to chat with you. I love it when you actually know the person you're going to chat with on, a podcast or do any kind of interview, because sometimes it's like, I don't really want to do this. And now I know I don't want to do it because it's Spencer. So I'm like, come on.
You're going to give me diabetes. You're so sweet. It's great to have you on here, man. Like I said, it's long overdue. Obviously, being based in the UK makes it a little bit more difficult to coordinate face-to-face stuff, but it's great to be here. I got to ask off the bat, what are you drinking?
So I was torn. I'm a big rum guy, so it was always going to be a rum. I like my beer as well, but I was torn between two rums that have the most badass names ever. They're both on the opposite end of the scale, though. One's called Phoenix Tears, and it is like a golden bottle with bits of gold through it, like Goldschlager or whatever you get. But I have opted for something called Dark Matter with ginger beer.
Right.
So essentially like a dark and stormy. And water, because I'm responsible.
Well, that makes one of us, I suppose. Of course, if you guys are in the comments section, as some of you are already saying hello, please feel free to do so and get your questions in. When you've got the opportunity to ask questions of one of, again, the premier journalists in professional wrestling, you guys should be taking up the opportunity like Sam is. Spenny and Gary, what's up, guys? What is up, Sam? Thank you for joining us for another live chat. Reese on Wrestling, the UK in the house, on both sides of it. We've talked about this. I am lucky enough to have a mother from Glasgow, so I've technically got citizenship. Technically, we've got two sides of the UK in the house, but I ain't even going to attempt the accent because it's terrible. It's
and I have family in Canada as well. So
hey, there we go. Yeah. We are crossing all barriers right here on the show, and then Ed hopping in on Twitch. Hey everyone, hey Ed, it is great to see you again, chatting with Gary Cassidy on Twitch, Facebook, and YouTube right now. Gary, I just want to kick it off with a pretty easy one. You've mentioned before that you were in journalism as a student. You graduated. What specifically had you gravitate towards wrestling journalism? Because even for myself, it wasn't really the first thing that ever came to mind. When you'd hear journalism, you'd imagine these big breaking stories, and that is wrestling journalism, but not really in the traditional sense. What drew you to it?
This is where I expose myself completely in terms of wrestling now, because I was a big wrestling fan growing up. It was something that I think all of us, or most of us, got into in childhood, and that's why we're still here. But I kind of fell away from it a little bit when I was going through college and university, and I really wanted to be a journalist. For some reason, it only came from the fact that when I was in school, I would write an essay, and my friend would turn around and he would have nothing on his page, and I would be 2 or 3 pages done already. Just things came to mind. I could write them very quickly. We were doing great stuff, and it was, no matter what you put in front of me, I could write it quickly. So I was like, right, journalism is the way to go. Something I definitely want to do. Went and studied it, done a little bit of work experience at a local newspaper, and it made me never want to do journalism ever again. It was horrendous. It was a little place just outside Glasgow called Paisley, just a little town. And I was just, helping them out, writing any story up they wanted. And I was working next to the crime writer. And on the same week that I had done my first week of experience there, they got death threats because they got a name wrong in terms of an attempted murder trial. And then from that, and realizing how long the jail time is for people that put out misinformation or things like that, it was like, right, journalism is not for me. Kind of transcended that, and I was like, well, I still like writing, but not so serious. So I done music stuff for a while. ended up realizing that music journalism has almost no money in it, and like, not a big deal, can do it as a hobby. Done a few odd jobs trying to find my feet here and there, and then landed in a role which is subtitling broadcast television. And all of a sudden, I seen my now former employers, but I seen they were advertising, Sportskeeda were advertising for writers, for contributors. And I was like, do you know what? I'll just write something. I've started getting back into wrestling. I'll just give it a little go, see what happens. And I wrote an article on which English Premier League football team John Cena supports, because he'd visited London. Horrendous article. But then I got someone in touch with me like, hey man, you know, our contributors aren't meant to write news. And I was like, I've made an arse of this already. And it was like, but your news piece was actually good, so we'd quite kind of like to bring you on board. And ever since then, it's just been like, yeah, I might as well just give this a go. And it's the kind of thing that I always said that, you know, from the start. About 6 months in, I was really lucky, and that I was, you know, we all aggregate news. It's just the way, you know, the way the world works. You're not going to interview everyone on the planet, so you get the people that do interview things, aggregate the best parts. And I was particularly interested in Elias at that time had signed a deal with Fender Guitars.
Mm-hmm.
It got covered, and I always forget the name of the article, the name of the publication. Sorry, it was either Guitar World or Total Guitar.
Cool. One of like the bigger names in it.
Yeah, like one of the, you know, a huge music magazine, but might not have got covered in wrestling. And the journalist reached out to me, a lovely guy called Darren Paltrovitz. He reached out to me and he was like, man, thank you so much for covering that, because my editor was like, wrestling? No one cares about wrestling. You covering it was good. If there's ever anything I can do for you, I would be more than happy to. And you'll know yourself, when someone says that, it's like, nice
you put that email address in your saved folder, I suppose.
I mean, you kind of take it as, okay, I'll give it a try, but I'll expect nothing. It's a nice gesture that they probably just, you know, are being nice. But he followed back up and he was like, no, seriously, I can get you either Jim Ross or Diamond Dallas Page. And I was like, well,
cool.
I mean, both great. Like, I'm not gonna say no to either of those, but if I'm gonna choose, I loved WCW growing up, so DDP would be ideal. Absolutely love DDP. So I got that interview, and the second I done that interview, I was like, right, if nothing else ever comes of this, I've got to interview DDP. Not many people get to interview someone that they looked up to growing up, so I've got to do that. But then it was kind of the opposite, where I'd done that and I was like, oh man, I just want to interview everyone. I just want to cover everything. And yeah,
you got the bug.
Yeah, so if anyone has anyone to blame for me being in existence, if you hate my takes, hate anything I write, find Darren Paltrovitz on Twitter. He's the man that created the monster that made me get into wrestling journalism.
I was terrified you were going to have us blame Diamond Dallas Page, and let me tell you, man, like, I will not blame Diamond Dallas Page. He just seems like a good dude. I've never had the opportunity. He was a personal favorite of yours, maybe for more emotional reasons. Who have been some of your other favorites you've interviewed so far?
Oh, so the weird one that I always go to, and it's kind of the catch-all one for me, that when anyone says, you know, what was the most important, what was the best, you know, what was the one that you most looked forward to, it was bizarrely Paige. And I do love Paige anyway, like in terms of, you know, actual wrestling ability, in terms of her character. Fighting with My Family had just came out when I interviewed her. I loved that story. Like, my fiance, who doesn't care about wrestling, loved that film.
Yeah,
she likes rock music, like, you know, everything about wanting to interview Paige was ideal. But the main thing that I will say about why that one was so important is it was the first time I felt like a journalist. And the reason for that was the week before, I went to Blackpool to cover NXT UK TakeOver 2, and the amount of times I tripped up saying that, and now I can say it flawlessly, it's great. But I went to cover that, and I was lucky in that there was about 40 of us in a room with Triple H, and he gave us, you know, more time than he should have. But I spotted Kenny McIntosh, who is the guy behind inside the ropes, and I was like, he normally gets the first question in. I will go sit beside him. Little sneaky tactic, make sure I get a question in. So I got a question in with Triple H, and I was like, Triple H, this was before I called him Paul, because now I'm a massive Mark who calls him Paul on every call that I get to speak to him on. Triple H, is there any chance, and this was at the 2020 Royal Rumble just 2 weeks before it, is there any chance we see Edge or Paige return at the Royal Rumble? Of course, Edge did return, and he completely no-sold me on Edge returning, because why would they tell me?
Everybody no-sold Edge returning. Edge no-sold Edge returning.
I mean, it's the kind of question you ask, you know the answer, but you need to ask to make yourself look like the smartest guy in the room, which I've now learned isn't so good. But I asked him about that, and he made a slightly distasteful joke about Paige. You know, it was a kind of throwaway comment on his behalf, but when he said it, I didn't even notice. And then when we went to the pub round the corner, me and a load of journalists, uploading more clips, you know, getting more articles written just before everything else went crazy. And I was like, oh, that's
not a good one.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing that I'm not sure how I go about it. So essentially what I did was I wrote up the piece. I kept the video unedited, but I wrote up just the interesting quotes for the piece, just so that I didn't need to address it too directly in case I was being sensitive on the matter. But I put the video out unedited. And of course, Twitter, even if you don't have a big following, if something controversial happens, it's going to go.
Someone will find it.
Yeah, wildfire. Someone else tweeted out the video with a big following, and I remember the exact phrase was, Triple Nose says this disparaging comment about Paige. And it was like, well, Triple Nose is a wee bit offensive anyway. If you're going to say someone's being offensive, maybe don't be
You're
offensive.
writing that article out of spite. Exactly.
So it's a little bit, but because he'd said that and because it all took off, I was like, well, I kind of want to be able to put this right. And it was just by good fortune that I'd been invited. And again, this is before I'd done anything big. This was the first event, like proper event I got to cover. But I actually got invited to BT Sports, their launch of WWE's programming in London.
That was on the bus, right?
Yeah, so I got to do a load of interviews on the bus and then go to an after party. But like mind-blowing for me just because I hadn't done any of that. But just by chance, one of the people was Paige. And by chance, I got maybe 3 journalists on the bus, and they said, who do you want, who do you want, who do you want? And I got the offer of either, I think it was Paige. I got to interview all of them, but it was either Paige or I believe it was Sheamus or Kurt Angle was the first 3 that they gave me the choice between. And because I was the earliest person there, because, you know, fail to prepare to fail, all the same thing. That full synopsis give you the rubbish quotes. But I was like, well, because I'm the first, I get the first choice, Paige, because then I can just close the story. I had nothing written down. The only question I had written down was, have you heard the remarks Triple H made about you? If so, what was your thoughts on them? What's your response to them? And she gave me a great answer, you know, very humble, but also didn't no-sell them by any means. She was like, well, I wasn't too happy about them. Yeah. On that night, Triple H apologised on Twitter, and I was like, my God, I'm never going to get to do any coverage of anything WWE ever again. I've ruined absolutely everything.
It's over. They hate me.
And then, you know, we're a year and 3 months later, and I'm still doing some stuff through them. So it's not too bad. But yeah, Paige, long story short, I could have answered this 10 minutes ago by just saying Paige.
There's no need for short answers on this one, my friend. If you guys have questions, whether they are long or short, we've got about 15 minutes left here with Gary Cassidy. It's very good, like I said, to have you back on here, man. I have intended to have you on the show, whether for a drink or a conversation. So it's nice to finally be able to do both one question and, again, the one question. Well, 2. I'll save the best for last. But one of the questions that I did have written down for you, like you even mentioned off the bat with your first article, how do you found things have changed for you as an interviewer? Has your style changed at all? Have you found yourself consciously, like you've said, maybe needing to become more of a journalist, or how has that changed on your end? Yeah, so I think there's 2 ends of it. One of them, people will laugh. You know, anyone who hears me say this will be like, you're lying. I have adapted my accent ever so slightly. Doesn't sound like it. I've tried to be slower, clearer, stuff like that. And oddly, you know, I've never actually had any problems. I've had 2 instances where I've had to repeat things, but I've never had any wrestler actually be,
unsure of what I said. And I've interviewed
like thrown off by it. Yeah.
And it's like Ty Conte, who obviously English is not her first language, was the first one that I was like, this could go badly. But there's only been twice that has happened. One was I was interviewing Darren Young, Fred Rosser. Everything that could have went wrong. I was doing it in my work, on my phone, in an office with no internet connection. Cut off has what happened. Everything that went wrong. I went down, I recorded it in 2 separate parts. I'm rubbish with technology, so I was like, oh man. And then the very last question, back at the start, this ties into the second answer here, but back at the start, I thought, do you know what? It would be great. This thing that no one has ever thought of doing ever is just saying at the very end of an interview, I've got one last question. It's going to be the most controversial question you will ever be asked. If you don't want to answer it, it's okay. It's completely fine. And then asking something terrible like, what's your opinion on pineapple on pizza? And it was like, and I thought it was the most genius thing ever, because the first time I done it, I could see WWE PR being so nervous about what I was going to ask their talent, because, and I was like, oh, it's the best thing ever. And I asked him that question, and he gave me pan-apple. What's pan-apple? Plain apple? Plain apple? And I was like, oh shit. And I realized the only time I realized this is because I also interviewed Chris Jericho, and I said something about a pay rise. And obviously in America, it's a pay raise. And I was like, it must be the I sounded, or the way I say I, and like pineapple or pay rise, that it just completely flopped, went down the pan. And it was like, right, let's get that question right out of there, because that is the stupidest thing I've ever done. And it's just the kind of thing that the best advice that I ever learned, and this was from interviewing Chris Van Vliet, who, is the most, if you interview any wrestler, it's fine. If you interview Chris Van Vliet, it's like, this guy does this better than I ever will. Oh, yeah. So I interviewed him, and he said the one thing that he always keeps in mind is, if you're doing the interview, no one cares about you. They care about the person that you're interviewing. So make sure you get the best answers possible out of that question. And I took that as, don't be a mark for yourself. That was literally what I took from it. So anytime I, put out any kind of interview now, it is always in written form. And there's a kind of design element to that as well, because I'm not an interviewer until, like, I'm never going to have a YouTube channel that's got 1 million subscribers. No one will understand me for a start, as YouTube comments dictate. But it's just the kind of thing where it's like, I am a writer. I'm not someone that talks for a living. I'm not comfortable talking. So I always think of what the best way something looks is written down. And then that just kind of naturally comes from, well, what's newsworthy. So I normally look at it as, and this is a poor way of looking at it, but what will get clicks without being clickbait. So
I like that though.
Yeah, so that's kind of my new thing, is just finding an interesting story. Like, again, perfect example that I'll end up with. I was on the NXT TakeOver calls on Wednesday, Thursday. And the first time I was the first question up, so I had to ask about the main event. Like, you can't just ask about something no one, like, if I ask Triple H or Shawn Michaels about their career on an NXT call, they'll be like, shut up, we want to talk about NXT.
Yeah, that's how you don't get invited to the next one.
Yeah, exactly. But on the, and again, you just seem like it's that kind of don't be a mark thing, which I hate that word, but that's kind of it. But on the second call, I was about halfway through, and I was like, well, if I'm interested in finding this out, then other people will. And NXT is the kind of thing that I don't watch it. I don't catch it every single week. I'm always playing catch up and stuff. But one thing that I remembered from doing NXT UK stuff in England when I went and travelled down there to cover that was that Pete Dunne was working as a producer backstage. So I was like, well, perfect. Pete Dunne is now in NXT. Is Pete Dunne still doing that? And the main part of that question, always set it up so you get a good half a question. So it was like, is Pete Dunne still doing anything? They kind of need to answer yes or no. Like, they can't really avoid that question. But if they want to
force their hand a bit.
Yeah, and if they want to avoid it, you give them a second thing they can answer that is going to give you a better answer. So the second question that I asked was, is anyone in NXT doing the same thing? Is anyone there a producer? And they gave me a load of names: Johnny Gargano, Tommaso Ciampa, Damian Priest, Volter, Candice LeRae, a load of names. And I was like, well, that's a better answer than the question I asked. So I think
doing the work for you.
Yeah, that's the full thing, is trying to, ask a question that people will care about the answer, but also try and not trick them, because that sounds bad, but try and make sure they have to give you an answer. Like, I interviewed John Moxley recently, and I got a lot of one-word answers, but they were great one-word answers because I made him answer the question. So, yeah, great one.
A great one-word answer. It's better than no answer at all. Got a couple of fan questions in for you here. We've got Samuel hopping in. Gary, what would you say is your earliest memory of wrestling?
So that's a really tricky one, and I love thinking back and trying to think of it, but I can never remember. The one thing I remember as a kid was, the colours. Hulk Hogan, Ultimate Warrior, Randy Savage. Just those bright colours are going to draw anyone in. Being on this side of the pond, British Bulldog as well. And obviously, I know that Spencer's going to be...
Yeah, I got a soft spot there.
But, just larger than life characters, it's always that. But I don't actually have any memories from that time because I was pretty young. I don't look at now, but I was pretty young back then when those guys were big. So my main memory, I was massive on WCW and ECW, but I wasn't watching it live. I was going to a little videotape market. My parents would allow me to buy those, even though I was very young and shouldn't have been getting them, but I thank them for it every day nowadays.
The age is neither here nor there.
No, exactly. It's worked out in the end. I've not committed any violent crimes, so it obviously shows there's
long-term storytelling.
But my main memories, there's two, and everything Rock and Stone Cold always floods to mind. But the two, one is just Sting coming down from the rafters. Anytime Sting was on screen anyway, but Sting coming down from the rafters in WCW. The other one, and it's a full story, but I still maintain it's the best build to any story ever. Taz and Sabu in ECW went for a year without touching. Yeah, and Taz is just my favourite wrestler of all time because he's the guy I remember back then. And I love his broadcast career as well, and now what he's doing in AEW. But it was the full Taz Sabu storyline is the one thing that I remember. And I don't, I don't remember it photographically because it was a year, but I remember enough of it to be like, man, that was amazing. So just that. But for me, it's all characters, and the one I always throw in that people are like, "You're talking nonsense," as the one guy I remember being so drawn to was S.A. Rios.
Holy cow, there's a...
Everyone's always like, what? No, Shirley. And I'm like, no, S.A. Rios was one of the guys that I just seen him and I was like, yeah, I love this.
Very cool. See, there you go. I'm learning from you. I got the story out of you. Reese on Wrestling, what is the best Ghost song?
See, this is... this is where it would veer off into a track, but I'm going to try and answer it very concisely because I know Ghost is a bit of a niche. Like, I'm covered in Ghost tattoos. I've only got one visible just now, but it's a little Ghost symbol on my hand here. But I've got loads of them all over me. I'm obsessed with Ghost. Went to see them in Sweden because a friend recommended them to me. They were playing at midnight until 2 a.m. And, much like wrestling, face paint, characters, anything will get me in. I love Kiss, so I love Ghost. I love Sting, so I love Ghost. So I went to see them there, and I was like, yeah, they've got me. This one song is stuck in my head. Go through Spotify, trying to find out what it is. Can't get my finger on what song that was. It came out a few months later, and that's why I couldn't find it. It hadn't been released yet. Called From the Pinnacle to the Pit. That was one, but there's two. One of them's a song that is an older song called Conclave con Dio. I really like that one, but the uncool answer is a song called Witch Image that was from their new album. And the reason I love that is I went last year to see Ghost in Germany on my birthday and got absolutely hammered. I've done that thing where, when you're in a foreign country, you don't quite know measurements, you don't quite know what's what. And there was a vending machine in my hotel, already a little bit drunk by this point, but it was like, this vending machine sells Jägermeister. I've never seen a vending machine that sells Jägermeister. It's a little bit of a walk until we get there. So let's buy a bottle of Jägermeister each. So it was like 3 Jägermeisters for, the 3 people that we were all going to walk. Bought them. Expected these little miniatures that you would shop. And it was like big box of Jägermeister for like €3.
Oh,
so it was like
boy.
having to drink that on the way around. Already had 2 bottles of beer in my pocket, and already had been to the garage and bought a big double Jim Beam and Coke. So it was essentially a mission of how can we make this alcohol disappear on the way to the venue. And long story short, they played that song there and they've never played it since. So, and it's the only gig I've ever caught a plectrum at as well. And, 15 years of going to gigs, the only time it's happened. So, special.
Must have been a lot tougher walk out of there, I would have to say, than it was walking into the venue.
Yes. Let's just say I don't remember much of that trip apart from the videos that I've watched back. I had that full thing where, it's your last day on holiday. Make the most of it. And I remember...
Why not? I can sleep it off on the plane tomorrow.
Well, not even that. It was the day off because I got a late flight to come home and get to see. So I remember nothing from... At one point, I was in a pub in Germany, somehow, and I don't know how this is possible, but somehow communicating with a deaf German man about football. And then I don't remember anything from about that moment up until getting home to Glasgow and having a McDonald's. So yeah, not what we're here to talk about, but I'm sure people will like to slag me for it anyway.
Don't worry. If anybody's going to slag you for that, they can slag me. I've been told once or twice I've had a pretty good time at concerts and had no idea how that good time came about. We've got Kevin Rollin hopping in. Oh, man. Who was your favorite interview and why?
So, again, I do always, I mentioned the page one is important, but obviously that wasn't, it wasn't the most, it was fun after that question, but it wasn't the one where I was like, oh man, I get to just have a load of fun here, because I knew I had to be a little bit serious about it. In terms of just having fun, recently I had the pleasure of speaking to Shawn Michaels, and just for me, that's, there's not much that will beat that for me in life. I'm not sure who I could interview that would, apart from The Rock or Stone Cold, which are almost impossible. I'm not sure who else is up there with Shawn Michaels. And again, it was the kind of thing where I got that interview through doing stuff with the BBC. So they directly asked me, can you slip a little Scottish thing in there? Ask him about Scotland. They wanted a 3-minute video, 3-minute video, and I got a 30-minute interview. So simple mathematics would
good trade-off.
simple mathematics dictate that after that 3 minutes of asking about Scotland, it was just time to play. Time to ask anything I wanted to ask. Inside the ropes were just we know that anything you ask is going to give a good answer anyway, so we don't really care what you ask. Kenny gave me a couple of things that he would ask, as a tip. If you want to ask these, that would be fine. If not, don't worry. And the main thing that I loved about that interview, my favourite wrestling match of all time, is Undertaker Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania 25. The most cliche answer you'll ever get from anyone.
But it's cliche for a reason, right? It's so good.
Yeah, I mean, it is just the match. It's the match I don't go back and watch much wrestling. It's the match I'll go back and watch. But just getting to ask him about that was perfect. Getting to ask him about I'm sorry, I love you. It was just, it's the kind of thing where you sit there, and it's happened a few times. I've been lucky enough, and I know that you'll have the same kind of experience where you interview someone and you just, afterwards, you just think, how cool is that? There's no feeling really like it in the world where you go, if only I could go back in time and tell, 10-year-old Gary what I just done. It would be the kind of thing that he wouldn't believe. And rightfully so, he wouldn't believe it. So I think for me, Shawn Michaels, but at the same time, there's the more challenging ones are the good ones as well. John Moxley, trying to draw words out of John Moxley is great fun, and he is great when he gives you words, but just, we know that his energy is at a low level quite a lot of the time, which is why he's so good. He's so chilled out. But trying to get questions from him is great. One that I really liked, and it wasn't even done through actually, doing communication like we are right now, it was a written interview, which I normally hate because you just, you can't build a rapport, you can't...
You can lose so much in context too,
Yeah, but it was with a guy who I now absolutely love in AEW called Serpentico.
Yeah.
Who is in Chaos Project with Dr. Luther. And it was just a joy. All of his answers were just great, even though it was written and it's not his first language. They were amazing. And it was that encompass all interview where it was a load of fun, but I also got the little scoop that he'd signed with AEW. So it just hit every single thing you want to hit in an interview, despite not being a face-to-face one. And then one thing that, again, I won't go completely into it, but one that I really enjoyed just because the person's energy. I know you'll be able to identify with this one. Shawn Guerrero.
Oh, yeah.
Shawn Guerrero is just a joy to speak to. And that's one of the ones where you don't really expect it to be like, it's not going to be a mind-blowing interview, because I love Shawn Guerrero, and obviously chatting a little bit about Eddie and then asking about her career. But she was just such a joy, so full of energy that it was like, man, you've just made that interview a complete, like, a 9 out of 10 rather than being like, you know, an average interview. And she was just great.
Absolutely great. This one was written in. This one's from the Chadster. Are you the Gary that has been messing around with his wife, Kellyanne?
Honestly, that is like, it's the thing that pops me more than anything when I go back. I don't believe in vanity search, and I won't do it on Twitter because you're asking for trouble. You know, if people, I saw this. I actually think it was another guy you love, Gentleman Jervis. I believe he put this up yesterday, saying if people are going to be in your mentions, you know, talking about you, of course, that stand up for yourself if they're being really offensive. If they're not, if they're not actually mentioning you, it wasn't meant for you. What's the worry? And I'm kind of that same thing. However, when you're, especially for me now actually it's happened in both roles I've been in, but for Sportskeeda, I was asked to collate backlinks of my interviews. And then inside the ropes, I just do it as practice. You know, it's just the kind of thing where it's good to know who's picking up your stories. You know, you'll see, oh man, Talk Sport, oh, that's really cool. Fightful, like you always pop for Fightful, you know, doing stuff because they're absolutely amazing. And then you come across Bleeding Cool, and I'm like, right, I know Bleeding Cool, and I actually am quite a big fan of the way they are, you know, stylized their stuff. And the particular writer, Chad, had been like, Gary, but not the Gary messaging my wife, as far as I know. And it just became a running saga. I think it's across like 4 articles.
I was gonna say, it's like a whole, again, we bring up long-term storytelling earlier. It's a perfect example of it. It's a perfect example of it. I laugh every single time I see it. I'm glad you didn't know it was coming. I'm really, really happy, because that's what I was gonna ask you about it myself, is had it been like coordinated or anything, it is much better that it wasn't.
I have never had any, and I should say also with his wife, I've never had any communication with or his wife. But yeah, I completely stumbled across it while searching for backlinks one day, just to collate a little spreadsheet and send it to, you know, the people that pay my wages to make sure they're happy. And I was just like, that is the best backlink I've ever received in my life. And nothing will beat it. And it has become, you know, I feel like it's the kind of thing I should get in touch and be like, can I just make this a series on, you know, a website somewhere just for me? No one else will care.
Just get you a shirt made up that says "Not with Kellyanne."
It's just absolutely amazing. It's the kind of thing where, you know, it kind of plays into this full thing where journalism, it's meant to be this cutthroat game. Everyone hates each other. We all want to, you know, chuck each other out the way and get these scoops.
We hate each other off this show.
Yeah, and it's
that's why it's been so tough to coordinate this, is we really don't like each other.
Yeah, now I need to put on this facade, pretend I like Spencer to do this podcast, and it's
almost wrapped up, don't worry.
Exactly. It's like that little backlink, and, you know, things like this, and even on Twitter, you know, if you see like people like us, people like Alex McCarthy, Sean Ross Sapp, we're always conversing with other journalists, other media members, you know, other interviewers, other people that like wrestling. Like, not even people that write about wrestling or make content in any way, because it's worth always just remembering we all like the same weird thing.
Right.
So why would we want to hate each other? Doesn't make any sense. So that, like, stumbling across that was just the perfect thing where I was like, man, I just love that people can still have fun, even in something like journalism. It's absolutely brilliant.
Unless it comes out that you are the one with Kellyanne, I hope that one stays in all fun. We got a great question in here from a good friend of mine, Mags, who I think is just not only one of the greatest content creators out there as well, another guy that I want to have on the show, but another great person, and giving us a great place, I think, to close it off on the show. This one's for you, I would assume. He ain't going to call me a leading creator in our community.
I think not. I'm going to disagree with you right there.
Well, fine. I'll take it, but you're on my show, so I'm here to put you over right now. As a leading creator in our community and inspiration to many of us low-level creators, what advice would you give to people getting into creating content?
I will ask Sean Ross Sapp, Kenny McIntosh, and Alex and get back to you. No, thank you for a start, because that is an incredible compliment. But I think the thing that I wish I had known before I get into this, and this is mainly a little aside, but the thing that I wish I'd known before getting into this is, don't be so opinionated on Twitter. Don't be so close-minded on Twitter. Welcome other people's point of views. Kind of acknowledge them, and don't be so reactionary to everything, because that has been an important thing for me to learn. I used to, anytime someone said something negative about me, I would be replying to them, and it just isn't good for your mental health. And it's also no good for not just mental health, but working, because you're going to damage your own reputation as well. If you're just going to be replying to everyone, that's time you could spend actually doing the work. And the main point of that is the doing the work part, because for me, I now don't, Spencer, you said it earlier, you said that I was busy. I mean, I am, but I'm not as busy as I used to be, and I'm actually putting out content that gets more reads than it used to. So it's all about kind of working smart and trying to get to the level where you can do that. And I'm by no means, at the level where I can just put out an article a day and it's cool. Although Inside the Ropes are quite good about me if I need to do that. But it's the kind of thing where I would say, my advice used to be, if you're not emailing people, you're wasting time. But I think it's worth acknowledging that you also need to take some downtime and make sure you can get the most out of the opportunities when you do get them. But for me, it was a case of the very first thing I done, especially if if your thing is interviewing, the very first thing I done was I collated a list. I've said collated on this quite a lot. It's not my favourite word, I can assure you. I've not got word of the day toilet roll that I've been using with collated on it. But the first thing I did was I collated a list. I think it had about 400 names on it on Twitter. And it was just a list of everyone in wrestling that I thought would be a good interview. And then I went through all the profiles one by one, either looked to see if they had their DMs open, or preferably if they had an email address for bookings or media. And then I emailed every single one of them, almost the same email. But I personalised it a little bit along the way, but I made sure I had an email, and this is something I would also say is worthwhile. Just have a nice bulk email. I was lucky that I had at that time Sportskeeda at first and now Inside the Ropes, and I had that little extra thing that I could add in that was good, where, Sportskeeda, I can say 3 million Facebook likes. Inside the Ropes, I can say, 200,000 YouTube subscribers. And even now I can say, I can try and put a little part of it through BBC's channels as well. But I know I'm lucky in that respect. I didn't start off from doing my own mini, very small project. So it can be a lot harder. But packaging things in the right way, saying that. So my thing at first was, hi there. I'm introduced myself first. I'm Gary Cassidy from We Have This. I was wondering if you'd be interested, or, if it was a booking address, I would say their name just in case they were not manning their email address. Yeah. And because even if they are, it makes them think they're a big shot, which is good, because then they'll be like, this person.
Write this one down, write this one down, Spencer, write this one down.
Just like, man, if they think that I'm being professional about it, they'll be professional back and inclined to help.
Exactly.
So that part. And then just underneath that, I had, I have previously interviewed, and then the names that I'd previously interviewed. And even when that was just DDP, that's all it said on there. I only said that. And even if you don't have an interview, even if you've not interviewed anyone, just kind of give them an outline of what it's for. You might get more no's than yeses. You might not even get any replies. But if you don't send any emails, you won't get any replies.
Exactly it. Earning a no is better than assuming a no. I have taken that to heart 100%, because let me tell you, I've been on the side of the no replies, and I've been on the side of not sending the emails, and I can tell you which one feels a lot better and which one actually gets you those interviews. Gary, I want to close it out with giving you the opportunity to give the 60-second elevator pitch for Inside the Ropes, because we've got to have you back on again, but we like to keep it tight on the show. So give me your pitch, your thoughts, why you love working for Inside the Ropes, and then nicely transition that one into where we can keep track of you online.
Yeah, firstly, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure to talk to you. Annoyingly, I've spoken more than I wish I had. I wish I'd spoke to you more, Spencer. So hopefully we can do this on a more level playing field at some point. But for me, you know, I've been on the side of clickbait, and I get why it is a thing that people do because, you know, clicks generate reads. It's wrestling. It's wrestling journalism. It's just the way life is. At Inside Ropes, we have tried to do things as differently as we can. We want to be credible. That's our main thing. I was just so lucky where I left my previous employer, and then I didn't know this at the time, but Inside the Ropes were launching a website on the Monday, and I left on the Thursday. Kenny got in touch with me, and he was like, "We would love to have you." And he sold me the vision, and it's a vision that I think all wrestling news should be. And I'm going to say that by also acknowledging we won't get it perfect all the time because we're human. So there might be typos, there might be stuff like that. I try and oversee all the quality sides, but the main vision is we've got a YouTube channel that's based on 8 years, I believe it is, of Kenny McIntosh interviewing wrestlers, bringing them to the UK, going to America to talk to the likes of Edge, Paul Heyman, built up that trust with all those wrestlers. I am not going to ruin that by putting out rubbish articles. So we have essentially made a website that is completely clickbait free as far as it can be. You know, a headline's only so long, but we've made it as clickbait free as much as we can. We put as many interviews on as we can. We try and cover as much as we can in as respectful a way as we can. You know, we try not to put out any spoilers as well. It's like I've backed away from kind of inside source stuff unless it's good stuff. I don't really want to spoil any surprises for anyone. So what's the point in putting them out? So we've bought into that vision. All our writers have bought into that vision. I feel like I'm going to be recruited by Seth Rollins in a second. But we've all bought into a vision that is about how we think wrestling journalism should be. We might be wrong, but we're going to give it a go and see. And we also have a magazine, and that's just long form stuff, and it's absolutely incredible. I write a wrestler spotlight for that, and it's just crazy going back to wrestlers that I watched when I was like 6 and 7 and being like, I remember none of this, but I'm glad I get to dive into it again.
I remember this was great. I'm having it reinforced. It's great.
Yeah, but essentially it's just that. And the main thing for me is that they trust me. They let me do what I want. So anything I think will get reads, I write it. Anything that I just want to write, I write it, because I've done a 3,000 word article on China recently, which was just because I wanted to write about China.
And was fantastic, by the way.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It was just the kind of thing where I was like, I hope I do this justice, because it's, you know, and you need to address the controversies as well. You can't just put all the sprinkles on it and be like, right, cool, we've got the sweetest article ever here that doesn't acknowledge the hard times that she went through or you know, the things she did wrong as well, because you need to acknowledge them. But they just let me do that. They believe in what I'm doing, rightly or wrongly, we'll see in the future. And yeah, it's just the kind of thing that I feel like I want to make wrestling journalism. This is a cheesy line. I want to make it a positive place, but I don't want to make it a unnecessarily positive place. Things need acknowledged. I'll acknowledge them when they happen, but I want to make it a place where we don't try and, you know, scrape the bottom of the barrel to get clickbait out. Former AEW star says this, AEW champion, WWE legend says this, and it's like you click on
Gary Cassidy shoots hard on wrestling journalism.
Yeah, I feel like there's nothing worse than clicking an article and being this is like, I've just thought of this right here, but this is the thing. There's nothing worse than clicking on an article and being disappointed. And that's the one thing I want to make sure no one ever is. If you click on one of my articles and you're disappointed, come at me and feel free to tell me why. And if you're right, I will be changing the article, because I don't want anyone to ever feel disappointed by an article. Unless you go on my Twitter and see my bad takes, and then you can be disappointed because they're bad. But articles will be good. Twitter bad, articles good. That's the moral of the story.
Oh, man. I couldn't agree with you more, though, and I love the work that you guys are doing over there as well. I almost felt odd titling this this show "The Mind Behind," because not to take away from the great work that you do, but it is everything in credit for the great work that Kenny does. He truly is the mind behind a lot of great stuff, and hopefully you guys are able to catch him here sooner rather than later. We've got a lot of great individuals coming up on the show, So stay tuned to Love Wrestling social media. You can see them scrolling along the bottom there. Feel free to give us a like, a share, a follow, a Yelp review, and anything of that sort. It all does help us. It all does help us continue to bring great individuals like Gary to the show. Same sort of thing. I had to send that email and let him know who I was. Again, we've hated each other for years, so it was nice to finally get him on here and clear the air with a good guy. Maddie hopping in the comments before we close it out. Great interview. Always loved working with you, Spenny, when I was at the business. And Gary was a gent whenever I spoke to him. Maddie, it's great to hear from your friend. Thank you for taking the time to tune in. And Gary, most importantly, thank you, friend, for taking the time to hop on the show. Now, we've plugged Inside the Ropes. Let's take a minute to put you over here. People want to follow you on Twitter, Instagram, follow your own personal site. Where can they do so?
Yeah, so I always say this, where you'll find anything that I do on my Twitter. It's just at Wrestling Gary. The guy with the at Gary Cassidy handle with 20 followers, he ain't giving it up. He just ain't giving it up. But I need to be Wrestling Gary. It's fine because I'm mainly, 99% of my stuff is about wrestling. But on there, I mentioned the earlier interview, DDP is my first interview. I have learned from DDP to be the shameless self-promoter. Because there is nothing to be, if you're going to be a mark for anyone, be a mark for yourself when you're not interviewing people, at least. And when I'm on there, on Twitter, I try and share, a little bit of opinion and stuff like that. But for the most part, you will just get articles, you'll get news and stuff like that. And I'm always not just sharing my work, giving the rub to the younger writers inside. Now, a lot of them are better than me at the writing part, but I'm sharing a lot of their stuff, a lot of inside the rope stuff as well. And just there to chat, normally I always say my DMs are open. Depends what you're going to ask. I'm always there to answer anything. If you reply to me or if you DM me, I'll try and answer. And yeah, it's Wrestling Gary. Share my BBC stuff on there. I share my Inside the Rope stuff on there. And I've got my own website, but it's a load of nonsense. It's just me using it as a portfolio for the stuff you'll find on Inside the Ropes anyway. So Wrestling Gary, and come and tell me how much you hate my accent and how much I've spoken a lot of rubbish in this interview. That would be nice.
Those are the ones that are going to go to the message requests, maybe not the traditional inbox. But once again, Gary, thank you for taking the time. And friends in the comment section, thank you guys for taking the time. I know there's a lot of wrestling programming out there, some not so great, and some like the stuff that Gary's putting out, absolutely fantastic. So thank you guys for choosing us when there are a lot of options out there. If you guys are watching on Facebook or YouTube, you guys are going to get the music here in about 5 seconds. If you guys are watching on Twitch, we are going to be rating somebody that I think is a great person. And yes, we're doing this again because I only just recently learned how to raid, Gary. I'm an old man, but I'm an old man who likes to learn. So as I open up the old chat box here, friends, I'm going to hit the music. We're going to raid Ditz, and I will see you next Tuesday on the next edition of The Mind Behind.